Hey there, Anders Ranau from Transforming ADHD here. Today, let's talk about ADHD and about being late, handing in assignments and starting at the very end towards the deadline so you get all stressed out. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. I was working with a student in his mid-20s and he was always late with his assignments. He handed them in late or at the very last minute. He would work 24 hours up to his deadline, night and day, to hand in whatever assignment he was doing. And it was bugging him, and he felt like it was incomplete and bad, the things that he handed in. And when I talked to him about this in a little more detail, he said, well, maybe it wasn't so bad after all, but it probably wasn't as good as he could make it. Now, he had a bad conscience about this because he always thought that he should do things differently. He should always be better. He should always act like everyone else at his school. But he didn't, and he didn't know how to. And so his goal when he came into my office was to be able to start when he got the assignment, work throughout the assignment period, and then hand in maybe a day in advance. Now, he didn't quite look right when he was saying this because it definitely felt odd to him. What I noticed was that he wasn't appreciating how he worked himself. It was definitely a problem for him that he was handing in his things late, but maybe it wasn't so bad after all. So I told this young man a story from back in the days when I was consulting before I started coaching. I was working with a design company as a consultant, and I was there for 3 or 4 months. And while I was there was a man working there, and he was a designer, and most of the time he was just sitting around, either almost dozing off or chit-chatting or being on Skype calls, or he was surfing and researching and whatnot. So most of the times it looked like he was working, but really he wasn't. Since I was a consultant and trying to help these guys make their business better, I was talking to the CEO of this company, and I asked him how he felt about this man not working so much. And the CEO said, well, I don't mind because this guy's a sprinter. I was like, well, what's a sprinter? And he said, about every 2 weeks, this man wakes up out of his chair and he performs in 24 hours more than everybody else did in those 24 hours. So he is our highest producing designer, even though he doesn't do shit for 13 days. In that last day, he'll do really high quality designs that we very often end up using because they're so good. And it just blew my mind. Thinking about the accept and acknowledgement from this CEO, looking at his staff and realizing that this guy, this man working for him, could in principle not be there for 13 days, then get a new job, work on it for a day, and then doze off again for 2 weeks. That's pretty remarkable, and most places do not work like that. Most places you have to work consistently. But realizing that you may be a sprinter like this guy can change some things for you. Now, with this story, the young man I was working with, the client I was working with, saw himself in a new light because he felt that it was absolutely true. And actually, when I framed it like this, that maybe he was a sprinter and how he felt about this way of looking at himself, he said, well, yeah, maybe I am a sprinter. And maybe what I'm producing is actually on par, or maybe even better than most of my fellow students. So just realizing that he wasn't just a bad student who couldn't figure out how to be a student. Maybe he was wired differently in a way that allowed him to work in sprints instead of the farming approach, if you will, where you do consistent work every day. Led him to understand that he was really a pretty good student and he was doing things right for him. Also, he was able to acknowledge himself and appreciate himself with his special way of doing things and his extraordinary skills in project management, if you will. Now, the funny and ironic part about this whole story is that after this young man realized this about himself, he could let go of the bad conscience, he could let go of feeling like a bad student, and it so happened that he started actually producing his content earlier instead of later. So he was actually able to not just work that last day before the deadline, but the 2 or 3 last days before the deadline, because he was not hindered by his emotional state. Instead, he could just perform whenever he felt he was ready. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, maybe it means for you that you should take a look at yourself and see, are you evaluating yourself by the standards of normal people? Or are you evaluating yourself by your own standards? Maybe you should consider evaluating yourself by your own standards, because maybe they're not too bad. Maybe they're actually just fine. So take a look at your life. Wherever it is that you're not performing well, or if you're one of those people handing in assignments late, or running towards the finish line at the very last minute, well, take a look at, is the quality of your work so much worse? Is it maybe just good enough? Is it maybe even better than most? If it is, if it's good enough for you, why would you change it? To be less stressed out? Well, maybe you should be less stressed out in those 13 days where you can just slack off. Or maybe you want to look at how you do things and prepare your mind for those last 1 to 2 days before you hand in the assignment. And you want to do that as early as possible in the project, where you can set up your mind to process all the information that you put into it kind of on the back burner while you slack off and then sprint at the very end. So let me know in the comments below, are you a sprinter or are you not a sprinter? And what's the good thing about being a sprinter for you? That's it for this video. I am Anders Ronau from Transforming ADHD. If you want to learn more about ADHD, your mind, your child's mind, whatever you need to learn more about concerning your special abilities as a differently wired person, come check it out at Transforming ADHD, and I'll see you there.